Welcome to Civics, a program on Arlington Independent Media. I'm Michael Shea, the host for this episode of Civics. This is a program where we get to meet a lot of different people who get involved in their community in a lot of different ways, and we hope to share their experiences. I hope they share their experiences with us. Today, we are joined by Portia Clark, who is a organizer, volunteer, activist, program creator, and she's done awful lot, particularly with the Knox Civics Association. So, Portia, thanks very much for coming on the program.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's get started. You, lifelong Arlington resident.
Yes.
Can you recall the first time that you got involved with your community in some way?
Oh, yes. Back with my daughter, the oldest one, when she started school. Living in Knox, raising my children in Knox, and she went to Drew in Montessori, and I thought that was great because it was in the neighborhood. And then the first year after she was ready to go to kindergarten, she didn't get accepted to go to Drew. So they told me she was going to be bussed out to another school at kindergarten. And she ended up having to go to Claremont. And after she got to Claremont closed as a school. So I learned about the school system as I was advocating for an all-day kindergarten because I thought it would have been great. But not only did we not have an all-day kindergarten, but we didn't have a school anymore. So she ended up being sent to Claremont. That closed, and then she had to go to Barcroft because the next year
It was even farther away.
It was further away, more busing.
Yeah.
So I got engaged around some of that boundary busing issue with kids as well as the school changes. Back then, within the neighborhood, the kids changed school 3 times for elementary because they could go to Drew for Montessori, then they could go to Claremont or Barcroft when it opened, and then by 3rd grade, they had to go to a North Arlington school. So I was one of those parents that became active and said, my daughter's not moving again.
Yeah.
And had a lot of families at Barcroft that stood with us and helped us to change that requirement that our kids had to go on to another school after 3rd grade. And she was able to remain at Barcroft, being the year that I also became PTA president at Barcroft.
Okay. About when was this?
She started school in 1981, 81.
80s, yeah.
So when she got to 3rd grade, probably about 85, 86.
Okay. All right. Well, so it worked.
Oh, yes.
Oh, very good.
Trial and error, I learned.
what were you like as a student back when you were in school?
Well, I think I looked at school as something I enjoyed. I couldn't wait to get there. I lived 5 minutes away, and I'm told that I ran to school every day because I wanted to be there. I liked my teachers. I liked getting engaged with the students. And favorite subjects were history and anything learning about the community and working with those at the time where we went to school that it was all segregated.
Right.
So you knew most of the students and the teachers, and they lived within the community, and they knew your parents.
So you almost, and you also were engaged kind of in the community in that way, as you say, learning about.
That was some, the teachers really made sure you understood about your community and you knew about it. Now, unfortunately, I didn't have parents who were very active and engaged because they worked.
Right.
So some of my engaging back then was with my friends and their moms.
Right.
And I always wonder, well, why isn't my mom at the PTA meeting?
She's working.
Right. So when my kids got to school, that was a priority for me, is to really be involved and engaged, because I really saw the benefits of having a mom there when you needed them.
Yeah, they definitely need an advocate for that. I, as a parent, didn't sort of pick up on that at first, and that was more being naive or something. That is important to be that advocate right from the beginning.
Right. Yes.
So one of the first things you got involved with was the PTA and the schools.
Yes.
And we already talked about how that came about. What are some other things that you've done?
Well, along about that time was we also bought a house, my husband and I, and we bought a house in Knox.
Right.
So I went through the process of learning about housing, and there were some other challenges in terms of affordability and being able to stay in Arlington, and we were deciding, do we move to Maryland or stay in Arlington? So I got engaged somewhat with the Civic Association because I guess our former president, Ms. Jenny Davis, was very forceful in knowing that I had involvement with the schools, and she wanted more involvement and engagement with the Civic Association, and she was on the housing board of AHC, which we bought the house from.
Oh, okay.
And at the time, I think I remember her leaving our doorstep one day and saying, "I need you at the Civic Association meeting next week." So out of the loyalty to that, I
Okay.
started and I stuck with it, and it was helping me to grow and develop and learn more about civic associations.
Was it a lot of the same people involved in both in the community, or was it
Totally,
more?
almost totally different.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah, schools was those that had kids and
right,
parents. Civic Association was those that didn't have kids in school anymore.
right,
Mostly elderly individuals that had been activists for years, familiar with the community and very passionate about what was going on in the community.
right,
School was, because we were being bused and desegregated then, a
right,
much more diverse group to work with on the PTA, and hardly any of those that were with the Civic Association.
right.
So one of my roles ended up being representing education committee for the Civic Association.
Okay. Oh, well, that worked out well.
Yes, it did. It did.
So, and what were not just the education side, but what were in the housing? What were some of the things that the Civic Association was working on then, or then has worked on through the years?
Well, certainly affordable housing.
Right.
Ms. Davis had a saying. She'd always say, "We're losing this community." NOC at the time was probably about 90% African American. So you could see the demographic changes in the neighborhood. It was one of the last affordable
Right.
neighborhoods in Arlington to really start to mix and grow. We started on development efforts. One of my other committees that I sat on for the Civic Association was working on the neighborhood conservation plan. So as I grew and learned more about civic and community affairs, it was housing was an issue. We needed more affordable housing. Our children were growing up and couldn't afford to stay in Arlington.
Right.
So we took on a lot of those issues to start to put programs in place that would allow them to be able to afford homes and stay near us rather than having to move to Maryland or other places. Then we worked a lot on the development within the community, through that comprehensive plan, identifying what
Right.
needed to grow and develop, and developing our business sector and rebuilding, and actually just dealing with the developers that were suddenly combing the neighborhood for properties and all the rest.
Right. So there was a comprehensive plan or a master
The
plan?
neighborhood comprehensive plan.
Okay. And how long ago was that? And how long did that take to sort of?
I think it's probably when NOC updated their plan, which was probably in the 80s,
Okay,
the
80s.
last time we did it. But that included components on education,
Okay.
development, business. So there were several parts of that that we were all engaged in, and we helped to write that plan and develop it. So
And how long did that take? Do you remember
it
roughly? Was it years?
oh, it was at least a year,
Yeah.
over several meetings and charrettes and studies after
I am
studies.
glad to hear they were doing charrettes.
Well,
in
I
the
don't know if we
80s.
called them charrettes
No,
that
but-
early, but
yeah.
it was, we did charrettes later, but it was like the charrette.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that is good. I don't think Arlington does enough charrettes. That's my take on Arlington. I know we do a lot of things here,
Yes.
a lot of meetings and discussion and committees, but that's where I think we should do more
Right.
for at the neighbor. Well, actually, not just at the neighborhood level, but even as a whole community.
Oh,
Okay, so then what happened? So that's the '80s.
right.
What was
Well,
the-
it went
what-
into the
went into the
90s,
90s.
but certainly started some of my activism and getting out of the schools and into
Right.
more of the community and civic affairs. By then, I'd already been a PTA president. And Miss Davis, certainly, I was usually an officer within the Civic Association. And then and much later, after I guess Miss Davis's term was ending and somebody else was coming in, and then eventually I ended up being a president of the Civic Association.
Was that a good thing?
Well, I enjoyed it. I
Yeah.
mean, certainly I got to know more of the community and the neighborhood, and
Right.
my involvement over the years. I already knew a lot of it.
Right.
So it was almost like a movement had started that we
Yeah.
had one president for 30 years. Now all of a sudden we're transitioning to somebody
Right.
else.
And you have a lot of other people that are officers at the Civic Association who do a
Yes.
lot.
Yes.
Right. I think the
Yes.
danger sometimes could be if you're the president, you're the one doing everything.
Well, I will say, when I was the president, we had a very active group that,
Yeah.
you know, of course, it's still a handful of folks. You don't have
Yeah.
all the volunteers you need, but you at least know who you can count on.
Yeah.
And I think I enjoyed on building on the relationships and helping us to get out to bring in and engage younger people, because I was looking at Civic Association members that were all elderly, much older than I was.
Right.
And I think that's what I brought to the table, is that people were more willing to get engaged, knowing that it wasn't just a lot of old people sitting at the table.
That is a problem sometimes.
Yes.
So into the 90s and then past the aughts, whatever. It sounds like a lot. It seems like a lot of the issues are still housing and development.
And education.
Education.
I'm still tied to the schools. Seems most people seem to think I work for the school system, but I don't. I've been, certainly the Drew issue every
Yes.
so often comes up again, and we went through those phases where busing was an issue. Every time boundary changes were mentioned, who did it impact? The Drew community. And then, we became active in ensuring that the neighborhood kids got to go to Drew as a neighborhood school. So a lot of my involvement has continued with that. And even now, we have the challenge of selecting a new principal, a
Right.
school that's underperforming, and my
Right.
grandkids are there. So I'm back into education again. But housing and dealing with seniors is some of what I also work with now more than I did then.
So let's maybe talk about the working with seniors. How did that start? And what sort of things do you do?
Well, certainly looking around my neighborhood, I have a lot of elderly residents that live nearby, working with them through community fairs. When I gave up being president, Dr. Taylor, our current president, decided my new role was community affairs chair. So I chair community affairs, which is sort of a catch-all title for whatever's going on in the community. But I do the events and I
Okay.
plan activities and ensuring that we have a good mix and we do something for seniors, something for the youth. A lot of my engagement early on was dealing with the teens.
Right.
And then we started to do intergenerational programs. How do we get the teens to do things for the seniors and work together to bridge some of that gap to meet the needs that we had across the community? And then a few years ago, we started looking at our elderly and what was going on with the housing situation because a lot of our elderly were either losing their homes or what we considered they were house rich and cash poor,
Right.
and they needed support and resources. So we started to focus a lot more on that. I got engaged when the Arlington Neighborhood Village started. And NOC is one of those sort of pilot communities that we've talked about expanding that village concept because we've got a lot of residents that need the support.
Right.
So that's been my focus more the last 2 or 3 years is working with seniors more so than just the youth or the teen population.
And is one of the problems with the seniors the sort of services they need are hard to get, hard to afford?
Well,
It's almost like the model of we don't really have a good way for people to live in their home but still get the health care they need or
there are multiple challenges and
yeah.
even some which are more cultural differences. You've got a factor of trust,
Yeah.
which is an issue because if people don't trust you, they're not going to use even the services that are available. So a lot of it is being able to market and promote what's available as services like, the county offers tax benefits to seniors. Well, I had a lot of seniors that would come to me when that first started saying, the county's going to take my house if I sign up for this program. So they wouldn't even consider it. So it was more of educating them to
Yeah.
make them feel comfortable with the benefits and the services out there. And then it just continued into whenever there's a problem on their street or when I was president, I'd get those calls saying, I need help with this or help with that. So getting a better understanding of what their needs was helped us
Right.
to be able to advocate for what we needed. We could put that into some of our strategic planning for the Civic Association. And then just ensuring that it was not a disadvantage to be elderly and knock without the support and the resources that you needed.
Right. Now, with all the various things you've done, have you found that you were using skills that you kind of brought in there, or how much of this that when you've been engaged has really been learning by doing?
A lot.
Yeah.
And I'm a person that really learns by doing.
Okay.
I think one of the disadvantages I had early on is because I was looking for that leadership team and those individuals that I could build relationships with that was going to bring me along and teach me the ropes. And there was there were not a whole lot of people out there. So
Right.
even going through school, I expected somebody to be pulling me aside to say, let me train you for this and show you how to do this. And those people weren't there.
Yeah.
So when I started to look at the disadvantages to our community, what are we not getting because we don't have adequate leadership and representation? And I ended up becoming one of those resources to the community to ensure that we were not being unfairly disadvantaged in
Yeah.
some areas.
Yeah.
So I started learning. And I started learning by doing. And that meant go to the PTA meeting. And I tell people sometimes it's a matter of connecting the dots.
Yeah.
And sometimes what people that are not engaged don't understand is you go to this meeting, you get this little bit, you may get another puzzle piece over here and another puzzle piece over here, and it comes together in the end.
Yeah.
And I can't begin to tell you all the benefits of my kids going through school and just going to meetings to find out that there was a program that nobody knew about.
Right.
And if I hadn't gone to the meeting, I wouldn't have known about it. So I started sharing that information throughout the community and realizing the benefits of some of these meetings that, a lot of our people today will say, I'm not going to a meeting. I don't feel like that's for me. And even PTA meetings, one of our struggles with getting parents engaged, it's not about their kid. Why am I going to this meeting? So I was able to start some programs which were related to parental involvement, community engagement, and helping people understand the value of them being in some of these meetings and what they learned and what they could get out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's very important. That's very important.
Yes.
So, you've done a lot. So who inspires you, is I guess I'm wondering. What motivates you? What keeps you going to the meetings?
I think it's being able to meet needs. I do like working with people, but I like going home at the end of the day feeling like I accomplished something.
Yeah.
I often tell people I don't need a title to do what I do.
Yeah.
If somebody comes to me and asks me to do something, if I can do it, I'm willing to do it. I think even your other question, which I probably didn't answer adequately about my skills and my knowledge, and other than the learn by doing, I do attribute a lot of it to working in the government.
Okay.
Being a project manager for years and being resourceful enough to know what needed to be done. They provided a wealth of training to me over the years. So I took advantage of a lot of that training to learn skills in marketing, communicating, building relationships, leadership, management. So I did the gamut of whatever was offered. I would take it and then use some of those skills to apply to meetings that I'd go to and other organizations that I'd work with.
Yeah. If you see it as a project, once you have this goal defined, you find ways to get from here to there. So you're working more with seniors these days, but are there any other issues that you have not worked on that you think interest you?
Well, I'm sure there are some, although I keep getting pulled into the education, the housing.
Yeah. That's an awful lot as it is.
It is, and the workers are few. We have, right now, I think it's a tremendous effort to try and get people educated about our school system. We have a lot going on, but we don't have the parental involvement that we once had, or, it's sort of waning after all these years with the younger generation. But that's my passion right now is, still affordable housing, still the youth, developing the education system.
The not having the parental involvement, do you think it's a generational shift? And I say that because in some ways, in the past, a lot of the parents, like you were saying yours were very stressed economically. And that's still true for a lot of people. So if parental involvement is falling off, is it a new generation of parents are stepping back?
I think that's a part of it. I don't know that there's any one thing that's exclusive to another, but you've got challenges today that we didn't have 20 years ago with parenting. You certainly have the generational differences in that people think differently about their engagement. I can remember the time when our belief, probably 20 years ago, or my parents' belief was you didn't educate your kids, you sent them to school for an education. Yeah. You did discipline. You did the house and the stuff that needed to be done at home. Leave the rest to the teachers and just send them to school. I think that message also is why some parents don't get engaged and involved today, because they look at schools as you're supposed to be educating my child. Right. And I think it's probably more of a problem today with parents that don't do what they're supposed to do at home. Many will say some of the problems we have today is it starts at home. Right. But what's the answer to what hasn't been done at home? And I'm an advocate in belief that you got to work with the child when you have them. Yeah. You can't always attribute it back to, well, mom's not doing what she's supposed to be doing, so, that child's not going to be successful. I think you have to work with the child and develop the child, or I believe in working with the parent where they're at and helping them to grow and develop into what they need to do.
Right. Right. No, I think that's very important. Yeah, it's even as a parent myself, I'm not always clear and about how much to get involved, how much to, and part of it is at the same time as your child's getting older, you realize you want it to be more about them, and it's hard to know that time when it should be more. You've got to step it up.
Well, I certainly had that challenge with my three kids, the three generations growing up. I had one that loved having me involved, being the PTA president. She was a socialite. She enjoyed me being at school as much as she would see me. And then I had one that would run and hide when she saw me in the school building. So it varies, but I just think it's a real key to a child's success is knowing
Right.
that that parent is an advocate for them, is that
Right.
that parent knows the school, the teachers. Of course, some of my, my years within the school system was my kids' biggest benefit was they know me by name. But then it was like, okay, I walk into the school and the principal's yelling at me, just calling out my name. I don't want other kids to hear that, to know that I know the
Yeah.
principal. But on the other hand, it was a big benefit
Yeah.
because,
Yeah. Yeah.
they knew that people were going to report to me what they were doing. So it helped to grow them and develop them along the way as well.
Yeah, and it probably is one of those things that if you get involved too much, that might cause trouble. But that's a better problem to have than not getting involved enough.
Yes.
You want to err on the side of being an advocate, being involved.
Yes.
Yeah, it's tough though. It's
It
tough
is,
all
but-
around.
but
And you
I
had
think-
three. We just have one.
Well, a real key is, though, working within the schools. And I think, sometimes parents advocate in the wrong way. So sometimes it's also working with that group to say, we're not always just defending our child, but certainly we're their best advocate.
Yeah.
But at the same time, how can we help them
Right.
and help the system if that's an issue?
Right.
So it can easily stray against, well, I'm doing all this, but it's not really benefiting my kids, but it's pay it forward for the future for others as well.
Yeah. So what do you think back at something that you're particularly satisfied about or proud about or happy about?
Well, I think just the knowledge that I've acquired over the years,
Okay.
which, it's a big benefit to have all of this knowledge. And where I'm at right now is I struggle with how do I share it all and
Right,
help
right.
other people to benefit from it, because I don't feel like it was just given to me to keep it to myself.
Right.
So I believe in getting out and being able to share it with others and helping people to find resources of what they need.
Do you have a chance to do any teaching or any?
Well, I do
Training?
facilitated sessions with the teens and the youth. I
Okay.
am doing some with the seniors as well, through one of the programs that I have. But I guess I've been doing that for more than 20 years now. But helping youth to develop college prep. We do summer camp programs. Some of these programs I created because my kids had a need and there wasn't adequate programs out there for them.
Right.
So I still do those when I have time.
It doesn't sound like you have a lot of time.
I do.
I'm
what
glad you
I'm
have the
allowed.
time to sit and talk. Have you facilitated? Have you had a program that brought those teens and the seniors that you might work with together?
Oh yes, yes.
So let's talk about some of that.
Well, one of the programs we did years ago at my church, we did a intergenerational computer training program that was through 4-H.
Yeah.
And I had my teenagers teaching the seniors how to use computers and how to use the internet, how to surf and
Yeah.
research and find what they needed. So I haven't done that in a few years, but that was where we got started on a lot of the bridging the gap with the intergenerational, just helping a grandparent to know you can get an internet account and your grandkids can help you set it up. Of course, today we need to do that with smartphones and everything else.
Right.
Um,
It keeps getting farther, more complicated.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then those grandparents can see on social media, Facebook or whatever, they can see the grandkids.
Yes, that's
So
a
that
big
is-
benefit.
And did that sort of lead to anything, or did it?
Well,
or-
I mean, I'm a technical person, so I use
Okay.
computers all the time.
Yeah.
But when, I just don't have the youth to train as much because this generation has had computers at their
Right.
disposal for years. I think what I've transitioned today, one of the bigger needs is helping parents to now understand what this technology is doing in the hands of their children.
Yes.
Particularly our younger kids that get smartphones. You're handing them the World Wide Web on a
Yes.
smartphone, and they can access anything that's out there. And you still have to verify some sites are adequate and appropriate because
Right.
not everything is. But just helping parents who sometimes don't have that understanding that, yes, it's a smartphone, but you're not monitoring what they're looking at, what videos they can see, what's on YouTube. I've even had some discussion with some parents recently that were talking about assigning their kids Facebook accounts. And some were like, well, I monitor everything they do on it. Okay, but let me
It's
show
pretty
you
hard to
some
monitor
things.
everything.
And even looking at the history and understanding how you
Yeah.
go back and track,
Right.
what they're accessing and what they're looking at. And some of these kids are as young as 10 years old.
And they already know how to get around.
Yes, my grandson is one that's learned how to erase the history. So I have to show him I know other ways of getting to what you've looked at, and it's not just the history that you can erase.
Oh, you have to tell me some of those ways.
Oh.
I think I need help with that sometime.
Well, even on the tablets where you can go back,
Yeah.
and you can look at what's been downloaded, it's a history. It's traceable.
Yeah. Is it? Well, let's just close on this then. Are you optimistic about the future?
Very much so.
Okay.
Yes.
Because there are a lot of new challenges, as we've talked about.
A lot more challenges, and
And-
I think a lot more educating that needs to be done.
But you're optimistic.
Yes, I am, because I just think we need to work with it, and
Yeah.
it's not impossible, but technology at our disposal is going to always change.
Right.
It's going to always be updated, and somebody's going to find a workaround for whatever's created.
Right. Oh, okay, but also like saving the neighborhoods, achieving affordable housing. Are you optimistic?
Well, it's a uphill battle. We
Yes.
haven't conquered it yet. I look at my neighborhood and the price of housing today. It's skyrocketed.
Yeah.
And we still are no more closer to being affordable than when we started some of our initiatives 25 years ago. When we look at new housing that's being built, it's almost like the rest of Arlington now.
Yeah.
And the sad part is our younger generations are still not being able to afford housing.
Right.
One of the projects I started looking at, the county just released a report on what's like supportive housing for homeless. I think that's a great idea for our elderly and our young generation
Yeah.
because they can't afford the houses
Right.
on the market today.
Right.
So, but I think there's hope. There's ways around.
Should we do more charrettes?
Being one.
I'm naive. I would think like, let's just do a charrette. We'll get in. We'll get the ideas.
Well, I'm meeting doubted these days. Considering I looked at my schedule this morning and I said, okay, I've got a meeting today, a meeting tomorrow, another one Thursday, and another one on Wednesday. Where's this time going? I'm supposed to be transitioning into a retirement phase where I'm not going to all these meetings. But they still come. We just trade off one thing for another.
Yeah.
But I find, again, I have a level of knowledge and skills
Yeah.
that I need to share, and
Yeah.
I need to be engaged.
Well, let's have you back in here, and we'll talk more about the things, and that'll be one way to start.
Okay.
All right. Portia,
All
thanks so much for coming in.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I also want to thank our volunteer crew here at Arlington Independent Media. They've been terrific. We've had LJ LaComa on camera. We've had Dario Bagueno in the booth. We've had Steve Cordle directing. Great volunteers as always. But most of all, I do want to thank Portia Clark for working so hard, so long, and so often to make your community a better place to live. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks.
All right.